It is time for Nightcap, a cup full of the Vegas Golden Knights, who, like the rest of the NHL and the rest of the sporting world, has not seen the ice or the playing surface in a long time. Joining us for Nightcap today, the voice of the Vegas Golden Knights, Dan D'Uva, again on Fox Sports Radio. You can hear him on the Vegas Golden Knights Radio Network, 98.9 FM, 1340 AM, right here. When and if they get back to playing. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm up, Brian, and you?
I'm doing great. Quarantine, family safe, healthy, everything good?
I'm doing fine. Thank you. Appreciate it. Enough family's doing well, and just perfecting my efforts at baking chocolate chip banana bread.
That's outstanding. I can't tell you how many things have gotten cleaned and taken care of over the past 3.5 months in my house as well. Dan, going forward, we're talking about the major professional sports franchises getting relit here in the United States, so to speak. And hockey, obviously, Gary Bettman, very determined to make this happen. It's just ironing out all the details. And to me, the biggest details, obviously, hockey is an in-your-face contact sport. And I've said all along, the biggest thing to me, and I really want you to run with this, overall as far as where they're going, when they're going to play and if they're going to play. But I say it's the testing. To do this, you are going to have to test players every single day. And I know there's now this throat test that maybe is a little more efficient, but it takes 3 days to get the results. I said if anyone who's been out there that has had this test done, the swab test, it is as uncomfortable as it gets, and there is no way a player is going to have this done to them every single day. They're not going to do it. And unless they find a way to give them some kind of skin litmus test where they can, find out within an hour if they're negative, how do you do this, Dan? How does it work?
Well, I don't know exactly what kind of test the NHL has in mind among the types that you spoke of, but I will say this. The NHL has said it will test players every day. So whether that means finding a test that is more comfortable or forcing the players through something that is uncomfortable, I could not say, and I'm not sure the NHL knows exactly that either. And that's one of the concerns in terms of the potential return. You wouldn't want the NHL to resume play in a location, in a hub city, where medical resources would be depleted or at risk of being depleted. That's why they are proceeding with as many potential hub cities as they are, rather than right now locking into 2. They're proceeding with all of the cities so that they can kind of gauge sort of towards the end of this month where they really want to proceed. So that is your point is right on. I think in terms of the testing, it to me is not only the testing once hockey resumes. I think it really is as time goes on, as the numbers have indicated, the disease becomes less and less prevalent, which is great. I think at the beginning of all of this, when the players are returning from not just all over the United States or North America, we're talking from around the world. I mean, right now you still can't get into Canada unless you're a citizen. So there are a number of logistical hurdles in getting people to where they need to be. And then once they get there, establishing very quickly if anybody tests positive and that sort of thing. Because we know the players tested positive when the NHL was still happening in March. You would hope that has been put behind us. But, yeah, it's testing, but also then figuring out, antibody tests. It's possible that people have had this and didn't realize it. The health aspect of this is number one. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and that's what I've said. You have to test every day. And again, the NHL players, the toughest, in my opinion, toughest of all 4 of the major sports, and also the least amount of prima donnas in the National Hockey League, I think, of the 4 majors. And I think if anyone would take the swab test every day, it's NHL players, man. But I still think a lot of these guys are millionaires. They're not going to let you stick the 7-inch Q-tip all the way up their nose every single day. I said in every sport, football players, there's no way they're going to let that happen. So they got to figure out a way to do this. And it's the one thing no one really talks about. My father, and I'll be quick about this, and I want to say this on the show because, last time when we were on, my dad didn't have it yet, but my father had COVID-19, and he's a practicing physician in Michigan, although he's being forced into retirement now at 82. But he recovered. He got through the whole thing, and he said he's had 3 back operations, and he had the test 3 times, the swab swab test. He said if you ask him, he doesn't know which one was less comfortable, the back surgery or the swab test. And he goes, I'm never getting that thing again. So that's a guy a regular guy that had it 3 times. So that was where my thought came in. Like, they're going to have to find some other way to test these players if it's got to be done, which it does every single day. Dan, the biggest confusion to me is the playoff system. I'm looking at the NBA, the prospective NBA playoff system and the prospective NHL system, and it's cool what they're trying to do and accomplish, but I'm really confused, and I'm believing if I'm confused, a lot of people are probably confused about what this playoff system is going to look like.
Yeah, well, rather than the normal 16 clubs that make the Stanley Cup playoffs, it'll be 24. So if you do the quick math, that's 8 additional teams, and 24 out of 31 means the vast majority of the teams are making this postseason tournament. All right, so why are they doing it? There were a number of teams that were on the bubble that had the rest of the regular season games been played, roughly 10 or so. There were teams that might have made it. And if you were to just cut it off at the point that they did, some clubs had more points but a lower points percentage, or a higher points percentage but fewer points, and so on and so on. For instance, the Golden Knights, if they were to they could have played a couple of different teams depending upon how the NHL decided to go with the standings. So rather than resume the NHL regular season, which made no sense, you got the Red Wings, the Devils, and teams that were just not going to make it. Even with an expanded playoff picture, they were not going to make it. So this made sense in order to try to be equitable to the teams that had a shot of making the playoffs, while also adding the intrigue. And there is a gimmicky aspect of this. I don't deny it. You get more original 6 teams involved, more markets involved, and frankly, more eyeballs involved. And I think in an unprecedented type of situation, there's you try for an unprecedented kind of solution where you include more teams, more cities, more fans. And because of the nature of the sport being off for so long, and sports in general being off for so long, I think you're going to have a lot of people watch this, even if it's a more casual sports fan or a more casual hockey fan. In terms of how they're going to do it, normally we see 4 rounds, best of 7 series. In other words, you need to win 16 games to capture a Stanley Cup. They're adding an additional qualifying round at the start to get from 12 teams down to the normal complement of 8 in each conference. And the top 4 out of those 8 are in automatically. There's the mini round robin, but it's for seeding purposes only. So you got the top 4 teams, including the Golden Knights, plus the Dallas Stars, plus the Colorado Avalanche, plus the St. Louis Blues. They will play a mini round robin, and the only benefit there is you could become the number 1 seed, number 2 seed, or you can be the number 3 seed or the number 4 seed, strictly for seeding. The remaining 8 teams play a best of 5 qualifying round, head-to-head, and that leaves you with 4 winners, and those 4 winners in the qualifying rounds get matched up with the 4 teams that played in the mini round robin. That gets you to the normal number of 8, and they will reseed, which is not something they've done recently, but they will reseed going into the regular playoffs. So, that gets us back to when they finish the qualifying round and they go into the quote-unquote first round, it'll be relatively normal. They did say recently that it's going to be 7-game series. There was a question about that for the opening 2 rounds, but it will be 7 games. And the qualifying round, in terms of statistics, they have not said that those will necessarily be playoff games. In other words, it's still going to be 16 wins to get a Stanley Cup. These qualifying games are not necessarily, from a statistical standpoint, part of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
That's really cool, and I'm going to have to save that because we'll replay it. That's the best I've understood it. I get it now. And ultimately, you will have the 8 teams in each conference. And again, even though they're not playoff games, there is so much more impactful than a typical regular season game because there's so few games being played, and it's really a short, quick opportunity to jump into the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Yeah,
really cool.
Yeah, and it's for statistical qualification. They're not technically regular season games. They're not technically playoff games, but for all intents and purposes, they have the importance of a playoff game. Now, the Golden Knights, again, they can't get knocked out in this mini round robin, but the importance is still there because you want to have the rust shaken off. You want to get back into game shape. This isn't like a normal training camp where you're just going into the games of early October. you're going straight into the Stanley Cup playoffs. You got to get to a very high level very quickly. And the teams that are best at shaking off the rust and getting into their regular type of game mode are going to have great success. And not only that, you think about the importance of home ice advantage. I don't think that we're really, we don't, obviously there won't be fans in the arenas, the higher seed playing the lower seed. I'm not sure that there's a terrible advantage in terms of the seeding because all the teams that have been banged up are now healthy, including the Golden Knights. Teams that had bad records overall, but maybe were trending positively. New York Rangers, for example, in the Eastern Conference had a great push. Maybe they're a more dangerous team because they've got hot goaltending. Any team really can find itself a hot goalie and go a long way. So in terms of the seeds, I'm not sure that that's a huge deal, but from a home ice standpoint, the one advantage for the home team, the higher seed, would be the benefit of last change. Golden Knights head coach Pete DeBoer likes to match his lines. He sees this matchup. He wants to put this pair on. He wants to put this line out, which is something we had not seen too much with Gerard Gallant as the head coach.
Yep.
So the fact that if the Golden Knights can get home ice advantage, that means more to Pete DeBoer than it might have meant to Gerard Gallant in previous Golden Knights postseasons.
He is Dan D'Uva, voice of the Vegas Golden Knights on the Vegas Golden Knights Radio Network, which starts right here at the flagship Fox Sports Radio. Dan, we appreciate you. And the big question everyone's going to have as the playoff start is, man, it's going to be really strange how short of an off season these guys get after, especially the guys that make it all the way into the finals. Those two teams, well, they're going to have like a 2-week vacation. They'll be back on the ice again for next season in order to keep the ebb and flow going of the game and the sport. But we're going to see that pretty much in every sport, maybe other than the National Football League. Dan, really appreciate you joining the show, my friend, and I'm sure we'll talk soon. Please take care and be safe out there.
Thanks, Brian. Best to you and your family.
Absolutely. Dan D'Uva, again, voice of the Vegas Golden Knights. Caleb, let's jump